Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gönül Tol. I'm the director of the Middle East Institute's Turkey program and a senior fellow at MEI's Frontier Initiative. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event to discuss the regional responses to climate change in the Black Sea region. Today's event is part of an event series the Middle East Institute has launched in recognition of Earth Day on April 22nd. And we want to highlight the impact climate change has had in the Middle East and beyond. Obviously, the Black Sea is of global interest on several levels. These days, we follow the region closely because of the worrying developments taking place in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region, but there are other worrying developments in the Black Sea that we pay less attention to. The region has experienced the worst environmental degradation of all of the world's oceans, affecting the health and well-being of millions of people living in the immediate region. And then there's the climate change, which poses risks and exposes vulnerabilities of the coastal states. Compounding the problems there are the massive economic and political challenges facing regional countries. There are international agreements and national strategies in place, but their success will depend on regional cooperation. So is that possible? What are the climate change mitigation policies of regional states? So to address these questions and more, I'm joined by a great panel of experts. We have Anna Dimitrova, who is the head of Department, Energy Policy, Environment and Innovation at an Austrian company called EVN, which is based in Bulgaria. Thank you, Anna, for joining us. And we have Dr. Serkan Köybaşı. He is an assistant professor of political science at Boğaziçi University, which is based in Istanbul, Turkey. And he's also a professor of constitutional law at Bahçeşehir University, which is also based in Istanbul. Thank you, Serkan Bey. And we have Andrei Kovatariu, who until recently was one of our non-resident fellows with MEI's Frontier Europe initiative and a senior research associate at the Energy Policy Group based in Romania. Once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I also look forward to taking audience questions through Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can all find on your screens. And please feel free to ask any question at any time throughout the panel. I will be looking at all of your questions and do my best to factor as many as possible into the discussion. So without further ado, welcome. And I want to turn to Andrei, and I want to start with a larger question. So Andrei, you've been working on this for many years, and I've had the pleasure of working with you when you were our non-resident fellow. So I want to start with the big picture. What are some of the most immediate risks climate change poses to coastal states in the Black Sea?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gönül, and thank you, MEI, for this event and for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. That's a very interesting and I would say multi-layered question, Gönül, because there are a lot of things that we need to take into account. I think the medium and long-term effects are pretty obvious to all of us because we've seen in the past few years the reports of the IPCC and their concerns, and they are talking about issues and the effects on climate change for the next 30 years. But the immediate climate change effects are quite interesting to take into consideration and to look at. We are already seeing some of them, and we have been seeing that for the past 10, 15 years or so, or even more. And I'm mainly talking about pollution and what that causes, health-related issues and health-related costs. And I'm not talking only about economic costs, but also social costs. There are more and more experts and organizations that are looking into that, and they are having staggering figures in this regard. That would be one. We can also talk about urban pollution, and the eastern part of Europe and the Black Sea region has tremendous issues when it comes to urban pollution. We can see some horrifying figures if you look at the major cities in the region. Of course, we are talking in general about natural hazards and rising temperatures and a very abnormal distribution of temperatures across the years and across the seasons. We are talking about droughts and about floods in the region that are increasing both in severity and also in frequency. We are talking about desertification in lots of areas in Southern Europe and Southeastern Europe in the Black Sea region, which poses additional problems and issues such as the water food security nexus and all this kind of things. But with your permission, I would flip a bit the conversation, and I'm pretty sure that we can explore that even more. Although these are the immediate effects of climate change, I think it's worth analyzing what are the effects of not addressing those effects and those causes that are causing the climate change effects. And I'm thinking about an old but still valid concept of the energy trilemma, the equilibrium between the security of supply, having always access to energy for our needs, the environmental protection, and then the affordability for these commodities. And not addressing climate change and what causes actually these effects, these negative externalities, will affect all of us in all these three categories. Obviously, depending on the country that we are analyzing, and obviously looking at a different timeline, but we will have higher and higher costs on all these three dimensions, and it will be even more difficult to address climate change if we are not starting to address it now. Because, and I'm closing with this, as we all know, and we can understand that climate change and the effect of climate change is like a trying to stop an Amtrak train, that goes very fast, and we are trying to stop it in just a few meters. This is impossible. But unless we start somehow, it is very difficult, and it will become even more difficult in the next decade.
Andre, I'm going to ask you to expand on that and to address what regional countries are doing specifically to tackle those challenges. But before that, I want to turn to Anna to talk about the economic effects, implications of climate change. Effects caused by climate change have attracted the interest of economists. Climate change is now considered one of the greatest threats to economic stability, because it impacts a lot of things. It impacts agricultural productivity, it impacts human health, property damages from increased flood risk. And in the Black Sea context, Anna, what are some of the specific economic implications of climate change for regional countries, and which country is the most vulnerable?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I'll try to be as general as possible in my response. Of course, my particular perception is based on the situation in Bulgaria, but I think it's quite relevant for countries across the whole Black Sea region. First of all, I think that the actual economic cost of climate change impact has not really tangibly been researched in the region. None of the governments in the region actually has statistics to show what kind of economic costs or fiscal burdens have been caused in the past few years as a direct result of climate change. Although that is completely possible to be done, as we have all experienced or witnessed in one way or other climate change, extreme weather events, or any other economically, let's say, events that had long-term impact on the economic development of a given region. As you mentioned, agriculture, fisheries, tourism, even in the case of Bulgaria, can be said to have been impacted by weather swings. And that's one of the largest challenges with tackling these economic effects. We have not really put a number or an actual size to the cost national budgets and personal and business budgets take as a result of climate change. That is also why, unfortunately, populations in the Black Sea region in general underestimate what climate change means to them, because so far no one in the public realm has connected the economic cost of climate change and what they anyway experience as economic actors to direct effects of weather change and climate change. On the other hand, there is another kind of economic cost that the Black Sea region will generally start to face, and this is the so-called cost of transition, which is absolutely cost that cannot be avoided. At the same time, the more governments decide to postpone this cost of transition, the more expensive transition efforts become. And this is something we particularly see in Bulgaria, whereas the government both tries to sell a story to the core region population that what they do will continue to be an industry for the decades to come. At the same time, we lose opportunities created by the European Union to actually offer an alternative to the future of this workforce. And we will not be able any longer to take advantage of these funds because the government has been so profound at saying that the coal has future in Bulgaria. And similarly, across the region, we see another, let's say, in other countries, this mindset being multiplied. In that perspective, you see also a lot of grassroots organizations or new political formations actually trying to really bridge the gap between the future and the reality in the Black Sea region. They're still a minority in most of these states, but we leapfrog quite sufficiently in terms of the development of these political groups compared to the development of these more green, sustainability-focused political ideas in the west of Europe. Here we see the development of the Greens, for example, taking effect very, very quickly compared to how the Greens had to develop from a very grassroots initiative to community-based politics to national politics in the past few decades in Germany, for example. And lastly, again, the cost of climate change will come for all financial institutions and all businesses who, let's say, to an extent, dare not to recognize the efforts of the European Union to push financing into a future of sustainable funding through the taxonomy right now, and this will surely have impact beyond the EU. So not just the EU member states will be impacted by that, mostly companies that are economically active or rooted within the European Union have economic activities outside of the EU, most likely within the same region, and the Balkans in that sense are quite interesting because we combine both of the two worlds. And therefore, if a company has to adhere to compliance or taxonomy rules at EU level, for simplification reasons, it's most likely that it will stick to these rules also outside of the EU. And the cost or the economic benefit here, even for applying these taxonomy rules, will be really becoming more and more evident in the next half a decade, I would say, rather than a whole decade.
Well, this is also a question for you, Andre. So which country, I mean, within this framework, which country is the most vulnerable country in the region? And also another question that I'm really curious about, which regional country has the strongest green movement? Andre?
Yes, I think it's very difficult to assess, and I would actually start my answer in slightly contradicting Anna a bit, because I think really assessing economically the impact of climate change and or addressing those causes is not that straightforward. There are lots of things that enter into getting inside this equation, and this transition cost that Anna was mentioning is something that we cannot ignore. It's very, from my point of view, it's quite difficult to assess. If we are phasing out something that really needs to be phased out, it will have a different impact if we are doing this in 5 years or in 10 years or in 15 years. And the evolution of renewables or clean generation technology, it also factors in this equation, and the pace of this transformation has a different impact on the equation. So I think it's quite difficult, and it's never a continuous moving target, let's say, this cost of the transition. And for this point of view, from this perspective, I think it's quite difficult to name one country that is worse and one country that is championing this. But I would say there are different, they are coming from different contexts. And this comes, this is related a lot with the affiliation of that country to different, let's say, member groups, blocks, exactly. If we are talking about, for instance, Romania and Bulgaria, they will, we like it or not, or politicians, domestic politicians, they like it or not, they will need to comply with the general consensus at EU level. And that will push, most probably, that will be the driver that will push the energy transition in the countries, not necessarily the political interest in those specific countries. When we are talking about, for instance, Turkey, and I'm not an expert, Serkan is, and probably will give us a few details, but when we are talking about Turkey, I think Turkey has now a lot of opportunities, economic opportunities, that are not necessarily related to green investments. They are still looking into gas, I think, and they can use that. They are not inside the European Union, and they are the producers that are based there do not, they don't need to be compliant with such strong environmental regulations. There are lots of opportunities, and from this point of view, economically, I think Turkey can benefit more in the short period somehow. So it's very difficult from my point of view to name a champion in the region and also someone that is performing pretty well, because there are multiple dimensions that has to be taken into account in what Anna was mentioning, the cost of everything, both the transition, but also the cost of, climate change and its effects.
Serkan, as Andrei just mentioned, well, going back, the Eastern scientists are saying that the Eastern Black Sea is getting warmer than the Western Black Sea as a result of global climate change. And this has caused a lot of problems for Turkey, more rainfall and floods, damaging lives and property in Turkey's Black Sea region. So in my view, Turkey is one of the most vulnerable, having a long coastline. So does Turkey have climate change mitigation or adaptation strategies? And then as a follow-up question, I'm going to ask you whether there are provisions. You're a professor of constitutional law. So I want to ask a question on whether there are provisions in the Turkish constitution covering environmental rights.
First of all, thanks for having me in this wonderful conversation. Actually, Turkey doesn't have so far any mitigation or adaptation policy, I can say. One should admit that Turkey's climate policy is based on hypocrisy. Because when it comes to the economic power of Turkey, the government says that we are an underdeveloped country or still developing country. So we don't want to contribute, we have still some capacity to contribute to climate crisis in this case, because we just aim some, this is the government's policy, we just aim some mitigation from the increase of carbon emissions. So this is not enough at all, because although this is not an economically developed country, that's true, Turkey is the biggest economic power in the region too. So we should do something more actually than the recent government's climate policy, which is actually negligible for me right now. When we look at the process, the history, until 2004, Turkey was not a party to the Rio Convention. therefore, there wasn't any climate policy at the national level until 2004. And Turkey approved the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in Kyoto in 1997, only in 2009. So we postponed always our duties and responsibilities in the region and globally. But when you look at the speeches, for example, in UN Climate Summit in 2014, once he was Prime Minister, of course, Prime Minister Erdogan, now President, said that climate change is one of the most crucial problems that we face, and we should respond to this crisis all together in solidarity. But when we look at what Turkey did to mitigate the carbon emissions or tackle climate crisis, we didn't anything. We didn't do anything. So, so we should ask. One should ask, where is this solidarity? Because you are one of the biggest contributors to the carbon emissions in the region. So, Paris Climate Agreement. When we come to Paris Climate Agreement, it has been signed by Turkey in 2015, but since then, it's still not approved. So Turkey is still not a party to that agreement, along with the other only five countries in the world, which are Iran, Iraq, Eritrea, Libya, and Yemen. We are the sixth. And we are a member of G20. We are not a member of European Union, but we are a member of G20 group. So Turkey is now the only member of the G20 not to have formally endorsed the deal after Russia ratified it in October 2019. But I would say it's not surprising, because the climate politics of the government in Turkey, as I mentioned before, is based on hypocrisy. I want to give an example. It's a really simple example, actually, but it shows a lot, I guess. In the signing ceremony of the Paris Climate Agreement in New York on April 22nd, 2016, the Minister of Environment and Urbanism, once it was Ms. Fatma Güldemet Sarı, said, I quote, "The real challenge facing us is to translate our commitments into action. The success of the agreement will depend on the realization of the commitments." End of the quote. But same person, Ms. Sarı, just 2 days after her speech in New York, was present in another ceremony, but this time of a coal power plant in a southern city of Turkey, Adana, against which environmentalists were organizing protests due to its greenhouse gas emissions, of course. So what we show to the world about the climate crisis is something else, and what we do within Turkey, it's something else, because the main concept for the government since a long period of time, I mean, the AKP is still in power since 2002. The main policy, main economic policy, is the growth, and we exploit, especially soil and rivers, to have a sustainable growth, not a sustainable environment, but sustainable growth. So that's why I can say that not only in the government's policies, but in general in Turkey, there is no climate crisis policy or climate policy at all, or mitigation or adaptation strategies to the climate crisis. As you mentioned earlier, the rainfall seasons has changed, and there are some really important floods that we don't see in the eastern regions of Turkey, which is east of Black Sea region. These rainfalls are not normal. Everybody knows that, but although we know that the climate is changing in Turkey, for example, the urbanization is still not adapting. The urbanization policy of the government is not still adapting to the crisis, and they build actually recently, they built some public houses in southeastern Turkey, and because of the rainfall, there was a flood, and 4 people of a family died in these floods. Because we don't understand how it works actually in Turkey, this climate crisis, what is changing, and what is the adaptation to this climate crisis.
And I have a follow-up question, but maybe after another round. I'm really curious about this newly launched Green Party and whether that is a response to the government's inaction in the face of climate change. But before that, Andre, going back to you, I want to ask you the same question. What are some of the national responses to climate change in the region? And maybe you could also address the question of what has happened in the region after the Paris Agreement, or whether the region is on track for the 2050 goal.
Well, the short answer would be that not much has been done since 2015, and for different reasons, I would say. There are some efforts, and there have been some efforts, but once again, this depends a lot on the affiliation of countries to specific blocks. So if we are talking about the EU, some progress have been made because there were targets at European level, European Union level, that had to be reached. Although, for instance, in Romania, not much progress has been done because it was already done before 2015. So the increase of the renewable generation in the total energy mix was rather low for different fiscal regions and investment regions, but not too much progress was done on this regard as well. Something similar in Bulgaria, but I will let Anna to develop on that. But that's the European part. On the other hand, for instance, in Ukraine, we've seen in the past 2 years or so some developments and some intentions of the government to actually create an environment for investment in renewable generation, because there are a lot of issues over there with the security of supply and on the dependence on Russian gas, but energy as a whole, if you want. On the other side, Russia has basically no intentions in addressing climate change. It's still the latest strategy that was published by Kremlin still shows a high reliance on coal and fossil fuel in their energy mix. So I would say that not much, little to no progress have been made from the Russian Federation. In Turkey, we've heard what is happening, but I also want to add a small note to Turkey, and Serkan, please contradict me if I'm wrong, but I know that 20 plus municipalities in Turkey have actually come together and have wrote different manifestos and have asked the central government to actually push for climate change mitigation actions. And that's, in my view, that's something that should give us hope somehow. Maybe top-down approaches have not been seen, in the region that much as they should have been. But bottom-up initiatives, as also Anna was mentioning, some grassroots initiatives can actually generate some growth and can actually push a bit forward the climate agenda in the region.
Sure, it's Serkan. Let me know if you want to address that, or maybe later in your remarks.
I agree with Andre. Actually, maybe a couple of months ago, maybe 1 month ago even, as you may know, in the last local elections, the biggest cities, including Istanbul and Ankara, Izmir is a stronghold for the opposition party, but even Istanbul and Ankara were lost to CHP, the main opposition party. And to actually push the government to have some mitigation policies, they organized a water policy summit. So because the water capacity of Turkey is one of the worst in the region, and the rainfalls are not sustainable. So they created this big summit actually in the pandemic atmosphere And just after that, Erdogan government started to write a water law, the management of the waters actually in Turkey. So the opposition, the bottom-up pressure is gaining momentum, I would say, in Turkey. That's true.
Anna, I want to turn to you. What about Bulgaria? What is Bulgaria doing to mitigate the impact of climate change? And also, how do local politics play into this? Are there constituencies that push the government to be more proactive on this?
Well, I would say here that in Bulgaria, we have seen most of our sustainable policies development primarily due to the need to comply with EU legislation. So it's not a process driven by intrinsic values or political prerogatives by the establishment here in Bulgaria. It's something just to ensure that we do fall in line with the expectations of our European partners. Therefore, we are able to access either structural funds or any other coherence funds that are made available to countries that fulfill the criteria that Bulgaria does, one of the poorest members of the EU, which is quite unfortunate, as there are a lot of economic opportunities, not just environmental opportunities for the country in this transition that is to happen for sure. This is why perhaps a lot of citizens have recognized the need that we need to speak of climate change and sustainability issues, which relates to air quality and water use and water treatment in a much more value-driven way rather than simple politics and simple targets and benchmarks. Here, in fact, we recently had our national parliamentary election, and among the biggest winners were two opposition parties that offered quite innovative in terms of targeting climate change and sustainability issues, platforms and policies. So for the first time, we do have 4 representatives of the so-called Green Movement in the National Assembly, which is a first in the policy life of our young democracy. And this is certainly also a reassuring push to all those citizens who, by default, usually green and sustainability voters are asystemic. So they rather try not to participate in formal political processes. But the fact that now they see their representation and their issues being picked up, formally voiced over different media channels and within the parliament, is definitely going to give this group a much stronger push for the next election and also the local election. In fact, the strides of the local green movement have become even more strong and reputable with the last local elections, where the local councils in both the capital city, but also the second largest city, Plovdiv, received a couple of councillors coming from this political party. And although right now it is part of a larger democratic liberal coalition, still the profiles of these people are quite well recognized as green activists. They have all stayed behind green causes in the past decade. So there is no question why they are there. Let's put it this way. Certainly, it's very important that climate change mitigation strategies, which we have a whole lot of at national level and at local level, this is a requirement under EU legislation as well, actually become from just dust-bearing documents within the mayor's offices, pragmatic rule books on how municipalities have to approach and really deal with the challenge of climate change. A very interesting example for the region, I will say, is what happened recently in Macedonia, a smaller state, very concentrated in terms of efforts, in terms of policies, quite set on its European trajectory, wanting to become a member of the EU. They also had a coal and a mining region with an ex-coal power plant that they tried to repurpose. And they probably showed the region how it is easy to do it by setting up a tender for companies that would like to utilize the land and pay certain rent to the state. So essentially the state gets tangible income for something that would have just stayed there and contaminated the whole area without creating workforce. And just yesterday they managed to find someone at the tender who would construct about 50 megawatt capacity of solar photovoltaics on that land. And the company is Bulgarian. So this is by default, in my opinion, where the future goes in that region and climate change efforts. A lot more regional economic activity, cross-border, and really specific initiatives that show how the future can actually start today rather than being postponed. And I agree with Andrei, it's very hard to put a number as to what climate change costs us today, action or inaction, in non-action. But just having the idea of how much we might lose if we don't do something today and if we postpone the action for tomorrow will be a very, very reaching argument for a lot of people who not necessarily see themselves as green activists. They would rather see that economic argument as a much stronger incentive to do something about climate change or to expect their representatives in national or European governments to do something on climate change.
Fascinating. Anna talked about this the new parties that represent constituencies who are sensitive to these issues. That's a big change. Serkan, there's a similar development, maybe not as dramatic, but something taking place in Turkey. There's a newly launched Green Party in Turkey, and I know you took part in previous efforts to bring these issues to the forefront of Turkish politics. And my question to you is, how effective is Turkey's green movement and who is the main constituency? Is it, I mean, farmers living in coastal regions, fishermen, the leftist groups, and also who, I mean, again, this is part of the question. Who is the party's natural base, in your opinion?
Before answering this question, I realized that I forgot to answer your previous question. So about the Turkish constitution, shortly I will answer this too. There is a provision, Article 56 of Turkish constitution, which provides environmental rights. And it's a really nice article, actually. It was written in 1982, and at that material time, it was one of the most progressive articles about environmental rights. It mentions that everyone has the right to live in a healthy and balanced environment. It is the duty of the state and citizens to improve the natural environment, to protect the environmental health, and to prevent environmental pollution. As you can see, it's a really, it's an article which can be used to develop the environmental atmosphere, prevent the pollution, and so on. But the thing is, this is an article that we cannot see the reflection, practical reflection in the real life, because it provides a right which cannot be used in the real life, because Turkey is not a part of Aarhus Convention. So the citizens don't have the means to participate to the decision-making processes of the projects. Especially in Turkey, we love giant projects like Istanbul Channel project, or third highway around Istanbul, or third airport, which is one of the biggest in the region. So we love that because the economy is based on the construction. We should construct something, and because the economy is based in construction, the government or the structure, the economic structure, doesn't want to let people to involved in the decision-making processes. So this was my answer to the previous question. And the other one, so the green movement is really weak in Turkey because we are dealing always something else, economical crisis or ethnic minorities crisis, or even armed conflicts sometimes. So nationalism, populism, and other politics are are prevailing usually over the ecological crisis. But yes, you're right. There is a new party, Green Party or Greens of Turkey. Actually, it's the third time that they launched the Green Party. First one was in 80s, I guess, and the second one was in 2008. I was involved too. I was even a local co-spokesperson of the party in Istanbul. But it stayed alive until 2012. In 2012, they merged the party, or actually we merged the party with a small leftist party, Equality and Justice Party, and it became a left Green Party. Actually, we thought that it was a good idea, but the thing is, leftists are leftists, so they didn't let the Green people in the party function or take a bigger part of the policies of the party. So the Greens left the party, but yeah, the party is still there, and the name is Green Left Party, but they're negligible. But the new party is also not a big force in Turkey, because the thing is, the electoral system is based on the exclusion of the small parties in Turkey, because to compete in the elections, you have to get organized in half of the cities in Turkey, which means 41 cities, and it needs a big money. You have to be already a big party to compete in the elections, to be a part of the elections, general elections. And even you are in the elections, there is the highest threshold in the world in Turkey to get in the parliament, which is 10%. You have to get 10%. So small parties don't have any chance to get the attention of the population, because the people think that, okay, if I vote for them, they will be under threshold, so they cannot be in the parliament. So I will vote for bigger parties. And even if you are not supported financially by some rich people or some big, I don't know, foundations, you don't have any chance to be in the elections. That's why Green movement is always weak, and like other small parties, communist parties, leftist parties, or right-wing parties. But the thing is, although the situation is like this in Turkey, Greens wanted to have a party because there is a wave, green wave, especially among the young people, especially after, I call it Greta effect. After Greta's boycotts, especially young people, very young people, are involved in the politics, and they just want a green politics. They want to see some green politics in parties. But even the main opposition party doesn't have any climate agenda or green agenda in Turkey.
Does the party's message, does it resonate in the regions that has been hit hard by floods, like the Black Sea region?
I don't think so. I'm not an expert for this, but I don't think so, because still, as I mentioned before, the other I lost the
Yes.
connection for a
Yes.
short time.
Okay.
The other crises prevail over always the ecological crisis, and you have to explain people that the floods or the other ecological crises that you face are the results of the government's policies. But still, we should have get more organized, and we should have money for this to explain this to the people, because other parties are connected with some TV channels, or they have financial supports by big companies, but usually Greens don't. So we have, I say we, but I'm not a member of this new party, but this is Green community, so it's bigger than the party. So we should find some new ways to explain ourselves to the people. But last sentence, although the green or ecological movement is not very strong in Turkey, animal rights movements are really strong. We have an issue in Turkey. People are really involved in animal rights activism. So we expect, actually since 1.5 years now, that we expect that the parliament approves a very progressive animal rights law. But yeah, it's delayed every month. We'll see.
Andre, going back to you, we talked about individual states' responses, but given the fact that the Black Sea is a closed ecosystem, so many of the problems, climate and non-climate induced problems, require a regional response to be effective, right? So are there, for instance, regional initiatives to tackle, say, marine pollution, or catalyze blue economy investments in the Black Sea region?
I would say no, unfortunately. I would say that a regional cooperation is just something aspirational, let's say, at most at the moment. And I would actually focus on 3 dimensions that we touched upon some of them, but I think, for instance, when we are talking about electricity generation, we can clearly see that everyone is doing whatever it wants. They are not coordinating with their neighbors in the region. If we are talking about nuclear, almost everyone is building nuclear in the region. So I'll start from the west. Hungary is doing with Rosatom. Romania is doing now, has switched to the partners. Formerly, it was an agreement with the Chinese. Now they are working with US partners. Bulgaria has worked, and I think is still working a bit with Rosatom, but is switching again also the partners to US.
It's an unlikely partnership, US, Russia, just to put it on the table.
It's a strange region from this point of view, yes. Turkey is collaborating a lot with on the nuclear side with Rosatom. So everyone is building nuclear, is building this high power generators in the region, although we don't really understand what's the aggregated need for electricity in the region. So planning this high power generators without understanding what is the synergies between these countries is something that can be defined as we want, but not as regional cooperation. Gas is another sector and another topic that in which we can see a strong disalignment on regional cooperation. And I'm talking also on the exploration on Black Sea. Everyone is doing and is trying to find a way to explore the Black Sea individually. Whether or not Turkey really has those high reserves that the government is talking about is still something to be determined, but they are still looking into that. Romania is looking into that. Bulgaria is looking into that somehow separately. Not to mention the infrastructure, the gas infrastructure that mostly Turkey is looking into to bring to the Southern Europe, but this somehow clashes with the other infrastructure pipelines that are happening in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and so on. There's a misalignment here as well. And finally, I would say that also future exploration, again in the Black Sea, for offshore wind is still something that should be done strategically and at an aggregated level somehow. But we are still planning, we are still developing strategies separately, individually. I've heard that Turkey is really pushing for that and may have first big parks, offshore parks before 2030. But this is the same thing that I'm hearing in Romania. So again, it's a region in which regional cooperation should be higher than that. It isn't, unfortunately. And that's, I would say that there are multiple reasons for that, but there are two main ones. One, geopolitical and historical reasons that we all know that are a high contributing factor in that. But also, once again, and it's very important, this different affiliations to different economic groups. So European Union has some objectives, then the other countries that are part of different other blocs, let's say NATO or let's say the energy community, have different, more or less mandatory targets to comply with. So that's, again, the overlap of these objectives, the win set, let's call it like that, the win set of these different topics and different interests in the region are causing this lack actually of collaboration and of agreement at regional level, which is a pity.
Anna, what is your take on that, on regional cooperation? And Andre mentioned that it's lacking, but what are some of the tools to craft a coordinated climate change policy in the region?
Well, actually, one element that makes what Andre just mentioned even sadder than it is that the tools are already there. So the European Union has, as far ago as 2 to 3 years, created a regional cooperation forum for energy and climate, in particular, Central and Eastern European, Southeast European Coordination Group, CSEC in short, as it's called. This was supposed to be the forum where governmental officials, business stakeholders from the region, also representatives of different civic organizations or initiatives would come around the topic of energy and climate to discuss what could be possible regional cooperation projects, cross-border initiatives. Also within the EU, there are financial tools, instruments that incentivize both non-EU members and EU members to cooperate on cross-border infrastructure projects that could mitigate the impact of climate change or reduce the carbon footprint of both countries and consequently the EU and the whole region. Projects of common interest and the so-called Connected Europe facility. What is actually interesting is that we do see some regional cooperation, but again on grassroots level. So there is a very strong group of activists against the construction of new nuclear facilities in Bulgaria, but also this is supported by colleagues on the Romanian side, because where we would construct the nuclear power plant would be exactly on the Danube river, and across you have the Romanian territory. Obviously the communities there also dislike this idea. So there it has been a very productive, in a way, partnership at trying to bring some health discussion also to this assessment whether we do need a nuclear power plant. Although I completely agree with the assessment of Andre. Everyone in our Balkan region in a way wants to be a hub for something, be it gas, be it electricity, whereas we don't realize that in the end we'll have so much of this hub infrastructure that there will be no one to actually use it, and probably no gas or electricity to flow through it the way we have imagined the transmission system level. And also another interesting example of sustainability regional partnership, Via Pontica, one of the most famous bird migration routes from south to north and north to south, crosses over Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, and going into Poland, and a lot of civic organizations focusing on the protection of bird species have really successfully engaged in projects related to construction of new onshore but also offshore capacities, and have shown that they can really act as a whole. which is sometimes quite surprising to national authorities, but also businesses that want to invest, because they never imagine, in fact, that the cooperation of different organizations united under one value or one specific interest could actually impact a specific investment decision or a specific economic development in an area. So we do see regional cooperation in very tiny or specific areas that not necessarily get the global attention or the national media attention, but are definitely a blueprint for more successful, more profound climate-oriented cooperation.
Well, we have about 5 minutes, so I want to briefly talk about renewable energy before I ask you the final question and get your final thoughts. So what are the social and economic effects of energy transition from fossil fuel to clean technologies, Andre, and how fast can we get there?
Well, that's I would say there are two things that we should consider, and one is the electricity system that we focused on today, and the idea of bringing renewables in this and phasing out coal and eventually gas generation, and that will come with a cost. I mean, we like it or not, yes, renewable generation is not that labor intensive as it is the case of coal and gas infrastructure, but I would say, and coming back to Anna's point on the cost, I would say that this cost should not stop us in addressing that and should not stop us in rolling out renewable generation, because those issues and those jobs have decreased already in the years, and the market will anyhow cause this decrease in the jobs in coal and fossil fuel in general generation in the region. So although we may lose jobs, I don't think the picture ends here, on the analysis should end here, because renewable generation will create additional manufacturing processes, additional manufacturing subsystems and subsectors that could offset the losses that we have on the fossil fuel side. On the other side, a topic that we haven't actually touched upon today, but it's equally important, I would say, is the transportation and the heating and cooling systems that are contributing a lot to the emissions in the region. And I think switching here not to renewable, but to clean technologies, for instance, electric mobility or electric appliances that will use less gas for heating and cooling is very important, and is also very tricky in the region, because we have a lot of imports from the western part of the continent, with the diesel cars that are banned over there, but are imported in Eastern Europe and in the Black Sea region because they are cheap. And the government cannot really say, no, you're not, you don't have the option and the right to actually use those cars, because we need to comply with high climate regulations, simply because the region is very poor and needs to address somehow those issues as well. So I would say that also that comes with social costs and opportunities, I would say, because once again, switching to electric appliances, switching to electric mobility, investing in energy efficiency, there are also sectors that are job generators, value creators, and economic sustainable growth sources, I would say. You lose something, but you win something. It's important what you put in this equation and what's the timeline that you actually assess. What is the NPV, right? The net present value. Where do you stop analyzing in terms of years this investment and phase out of different other technologies that are polluting today?
Well, finally, looking ahead, and please, anyone should feel free to weigh in on this. Looking ahead, what can we expect from this year's COP? For decades, world governments have met every year to craft a global response to the climate emergency, and COP stands for Conference of the Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So what will happen in the Black Sea region in the years to come? And please include your final words before we wrap up.
I'll take the stage very shortly. I think what we might expect with the latest geopolitical changes from COP is a lot more leadership from the US and perhaps China. To an extent, this would therefore mandate the governments or the political figures within our region to be more outspoken about the need to adhere to the new world order, which goes more towards climate change, sustainability, and green policies. At least that would be my bet and hope to an extent. And just to complement what Andrei was saying, for sure we shouldn't go into analysis paralysis over when exactly investments in transition need to happen. This is only necessary so that a larger group of the population understands the narrative, understands what would be the financial implication to their well-being if nothing is done. And last point, naturally we will go to an energy system where less people are employed, and that wouldn't be so much because technologies that are coming in require less people to operate them. It will be simply because we don't have the same amount of people. Either in our region or also in Europe in general. We have demographic crisis in that part of the Balkans, and for sure, in order to operate in the same way, the energy system as a whole and the sectors related to that industry in general, we would need to go into more digitalization, which in the end will also result in more automation.
Thank you. Andrei, final thoughts?
Well, I would say, just to be very brief on that, I would say that the latest negotiations and discussions between the U.S., between the Chinese diplomats, the European Union representatives are quite, they should give us quite a hope for what is coming for the next COP. There are lots of things to be addressed, and carbon taxing, global carbon taxing is something extremely difficult. As much as we all wanted, it's something very difficult to put in place and very challenging, and it's a new geopolitical issue that will shape our world in the next decades. But the discussion that have started, and also obviously the actions that have been taken by the Biden administration, are really encouraging for what we should expect for the next COP, and that will probably drive, hopefully, some change also in the past years in the next year, in the Black Sea region. I would expect that.
Sarkan?
I'm not optimistic at all because I think none of the governments could understand how urgently we should take measures, drastic measures, to tackle climate crisis, because we are heading towards the sixth mass extinction, and we should find some really important and dramatic changes. We should create some dramatic changes in our daily lives. So I think it's not the main politics or main topic. It will be in the COP, next COP. For example, the government still they approach to the climate crisis through the lenses of economy, and they cannot leave behind these capitalist bourgeois economic systems. For example, 2 days ago, in a commission in the parliament in Turkey, the deputies discussed about the climate crisis. But the main topic of this commission was not how to tackle the environmental disasters or how to mitigate the carbon emissions, but it was how much money we will lose because of the European New Green Deal. So this is the approach of the deputies, the most important people who manages these countries. So I'm not an optimistic at all.
Well, we have to end it there on that positive note. I would like to thank you all for making the time to join us today. It was a fascinating discussion. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you so much. And also thanks to those who have joined us today, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.